Good afternoon. Welcome to another Goalline webinar. Today we are going to talk about managing a league using the Goalline platform. Very excited to talk about this because I think there's all kinds of really cool features. If you're already using Goalline, hopefully you'll learn some new things here today. If you're not using Goalline yet, hopefully you'll see the kind of tools that you know you will need to manage your league and get started on the right foot. A couple of housekeeping notes just as we get started here. You'll note that you don't have any audio options throughout the webinar, but there is a chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw those questions into the chat, and we'll make sure to get to those. If it's not something that we'll cover down the road, we'll hopefully have some time at the end of the webinar to go through any questions that might still be there. And as always, lots of different ways for you to get help from us outside of today's webinar, and that would be contacting our support team. So Goalline support at stacksports.com. Goalline.ca has a recent facelift, so if you check that out, you'll notice we're working on building out a brand new help center, but faq.goalline.ca is also still available with lots of searchable help material. Everything we're going to cover today, you should find at least a quick article outlining some information on that, but you can always reach out to our support team if you have any further questions. So today's topic, as I said, it is managing a league using Goalline. We're going to be talking about how you create your league season and schedule. We'll talk mainly about kind of the general conventions there, and then we'll look at how to add games into those schedules. Our look at adding games is going to be a little bit brief. We'll do a bit of an overview there, but I think you'll find that, especially when it comes to getting games into the system, it's fairly straightforward. I think the focus of today's webinar is mainly going to be making sure that you have the correct structure, that you have the right configurations when it comes to your schedule details, and that your things like tiebreakers and standings columns are set correctly, how to use conferences, and how to do things like moving teams between divisions or in moving them from a different conference. We'll look at briefly at team registration and essentially how that's going to relate to how you manage your leagues, as well as team tie-ins, again, how that is going to relate to managing leagues if your clubs also use Goalline. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then, of course, we'll talk about suspensions and statistics, because those are two major elements that go into managing a league on the day-to-day basis. So we're using our demo site here, Trevor's demo site that I've kind of usurped on him, and I keep using his demo site here just because I really like the layout of it. We've got a great menu going here. You can see lots of different items in the menu. If you are running a league with Goalline, there are some things when you manage your menu that you might want to do differently from the organization right next to you. Everybody's a little different with how you want your items to appear and how you want folks to be able to navigate into the league and the team different menus that they might want to see on your website. There are some items that you can place directly in your menu that land you right on standings pages for specific divisions. You can also have rep teams in combination with your leagues that you manage yourself. The great example that applies to a lot of organizations, even if you don't quite think of it this way, is an organization that has rep or travel teams that also runs their own house leagues. Running your own house league is running a league, whether you're doing it on a competitive basis or if it's just for recreation, it's still managing a league. So a lot of these things, the things that we're going to cover today are going to apply to all of those scenarios. So even if it is a house league that you run for U6, or as we often call them up here in Canada, the Timbits groups, whether it's that or whether it's an adult league you're running or a competitive league, the tools that we'll touch on today are going to factor in there. So the first thing we will focus on is managing your leagues. So we're going to log in, and so you'll go to the admin login area, and that's going to bring you to your Goalline control panel. See if I can make this a little bigger just to share the screen a little bit bigger here. So that should be nice and big for everybody there. We're going to go and we're going to manage leagues, and that's going to be found in the scheduling section of the control panel. You do manage leagues from the master menu, so this does have to be something done by either a main contact or someone who's been added with permission to manage leagues. Some organizations will choose to add a website administrator who coordinates different leagues, maybe has permissions to manage more than one league. That doesn't mean you have to give that person the ability to actually create leagues. You may want to keep that permission restricted, and then you just give them permissions to the new league once they're created. So in the bodies section of your scheduling tools, you'll find that there's some options here to create association teams. These are your rep teams, and then managing leagues. These are the ones that we're going to talk about today. Goalline is going to use the word league here when you might use the word division or tier or category or age group. Lots of different terminology goes into it, but essentially the league is where the standings are maintained. So if you maintain the standings for the division, this is where you're going to go to add it. If you have a rep team where someone else somewhere else manages the standings and all you do is care about your schedule for home and away games, then that's an association team for you. So we're going to click on Manage Leagues, and this is where we go to add in any of the divisions that we want. So over here, we've already got a couple started. So there's competitive divisions here, and then there's some house divisions. So we've got a Halifax Boys and a Halifax Girls U18 house division. All the teams that get put into this division are going to play against each other, and the standings are all going to be accumulated, and they could be broken down into different conferences, but they're all together. We can't schedule a team from the Halifax Boys U18 against someone who is in the Girls U18. If I did want to move a team, I could certainly do that, and we'll look at how we move teams later on in today's webinar. Oh, let me just click back here and get rid of that. I clicked on it, so it wanted me to edit that division. I'm going to go ahead and add another division. So we'll just add another house league here, and we'll add one for, say, U16. So we'll add a U16 boys house league. The convention that I always like to use is going to be the age, the gender, and the skill. And when I say skill, I'm really just talking about that sort of that playing level. So this is a house league. Some organizations have distinct characteristics where competitive might be AAA, AA, A, and then B and C might be considered your house leagues or your recreational. Whatever your convention is, using age, gender, and skill to create the name of the league is going to be really helpful to those who are looking for it on the public side of your website or when they're receiving emails about the games that are scheduled for their teams. So this is a convention that everybody is fairly used to. So whatever the terminology is that people are used to seeing in your sport, in your area, that's the convention you want to use here. But my recommendation, as I said, age, gender, and skill. We're also going to add the age, skill, and gender information in here. This is just demographic information. There should be an option in here that matches what you've selected. So we're looking at U16. If I scroll through here, I'm going to find there's a bunch of U options, and I can locate that I do have a U16. Skill level, again, there should be an option in here that applies based on whatever type of skill level you want to label that as. So if you do the AAA through to C or D or even E, you can do that. If you use different tier words, you can use those. There's also going to be a few generics, so recreational or house are options that you can just pick right from here. Competitive versus recreational, whatever makes sense to you. I'm going to select house here, and because I selected that this is going to be a boys division, I'll leave the gender here to male, but of course I could select female or that it's co-ed. These restrictions are, these characteristics are not restrictions on who can play in this division. If you do have restrictions on the age and the gender of players who are going to participate in the division, there are ways that you can combine your team registration and individual registration forms to ensure that you have the correct age and gender signing up for the different programs that you offer. These are just characteristics that apply to the league. Now, I also have a multi-sport organization, so I'm going to select the sport for this, and I am going to select the hockey sport just for simplicity here, but you can obviously select whatever sport applies to you if you happen to have a multi-sport. If you don't have a multi-sport organization, you won't even see this field, and it's just going to assume the sport based on what type of organization you are. So if you're just a soccer organization, everything you do is soccer, then the system knows that when you're creating this league, the sport is soccer, and your terminology will be as such. So I'm going to select that here. The other thing that I need to look at is my menu placement. Because I already have a couple of menu placements, I can use the drop down to select the menu placement to be where I want. This is a house league, so it makes sense that I would select house. But if I wanted a completely new menu label that doesn't exist over here yet, I can just let it leave it here as new menu label. That's going to create a brand new menu label. It does typically use the sport for a multi-sport organization or the age for normal organizations as the new label that it's going to give you, but you'll notice that you can just edit that very quickly and easily to be whatever label you'd like that to be. So I am going to choose the house option over here. And just before I click to create this league, I just want to point out that there are some additional things that you can select. And this relates really nicely to how you may deal with different divisions. If you are adding divisions and they're, a house league division for U6, you may not report games at all at that level. So you're not interested in game results, statistics, or standings. You might only be interested in news and the schedule. So you can deselect the options from here, and that means that they won't display on the public side when folks are looking at the menu. They're not going to see standings, results, and statistics when they're looking at this division. If that's something where at your younger levels you don't report games, you can do this right from the beginning. You can always edit a division and come back and uncheck those things or check them to put them back in the menu if you want to. Because this one's U16, I'm going to assume that we're probably going to report games. We may not have full statistics, but that's fine. I can leave whatever menu items here that I'd like. If you do have a baseball organization and we've enabled the advanced pitch count tools for you, you will see pitch count rules in here. So if you're adding baseball divisions and you're using advanced pitch count, then you will see this here as well. So I'm not creating a baseball league, so I'm not going to worry about those, and I'm going to click to create my new league. I'm going to repeat this process to add all of the different divisions that I need to add to get myself started for the new season that I'm getting ready for. So U16 boys house, if I also need a U16 girls house or a U14 boys house, I would just continue adding my house league divisions until they're all listed and I'm ready to go to the next step of getting them ready for my next season. The next step is to add a season and a schedule. And this is, again, where sometimes naming conventions come in really handy just to understand the best way to label your seasons and schedules. Again, we're in the scheduling section and we're going to go to the schedule settings and select manage seasons. The season name, we give you some teaser text here, and this is really helpful, and we really should pay attention to the teaser text that you're going to find in there. So we do want to label our season with the appropriate calendar year reference, and there's times when you may want it to include an actual season reference like fall or summer or winter or spring. There are times when that's appropriate. Whenever possible, if you've ever heard me do a webinar or saw my tutorials on managing seasons, I do generally recommend that you keep it as simple as possible. 2021-22 is a great label for your season if you have a winter sport that spans from the fall into the spring, because we know it's going to start in 21, it's going to end in 22, and I want it to start on or before today's date, and I want it to end after I know that all of the season is going to be over. And that's going to include things like the playoffs and league championships that might happen at the end of the season. The schedules that we're going to add next are where we're going to have labels like regular season, preseason, playoffs, finals, that type of thing. Those are all schedules that belong in the season. So one of the things that I find is one of the not to say that it's a common mistake, but one of the mistakes that I do see most commonly is naming the season as if it was a schedule. And that just creates some confusion, and it also creates a little bit of duplication of some of the words that are going to end up being used when we see this information on the website or in schedule exports and things like that. So the season name should be a calendar reference and possibly a season reference. In some sports, it's appropriate to say, like, maybe this will be the 2022 indoor or outdoor, winter versus summer. So there's different times when that's appropriate. If you can, if it makes sense for your organization, I generally recommend you do a nice wide season date range that starts on or before today and ends, well after your season and a little bit before this same time next year. If you find that you're always preparing your new season in early September, then having a season that goes until sometime in, say, July or August, if you don't have an active schedule that's happening in the month of August, then that's a really good season date range to go with. Here we have June 1st to May 31st as the schedule that's being used. So this is starting in 2021 and it's going to 2022. Because I want to be consistent with the rest of the schedules on this particular site, I'm going to make sure that my schedule ends on May 31st, 2022 as well. Most hockey organizations and lacrosse and even like ball hockey and basketball do tend to finish up sometime in the early to mid spring. So May 31st might be a great time to finish up your season. If you have games though that go into June, then you want to make sure your season goes into June. So just keep that in mind as you're creating that. So I'm going to go ahead and select that we want to do, we'll do May 31st, 2022. And I'm only in this case going to check the one new one that I've created. But as you can see here, the nice convenient check all, when you've just added a whole bunch of divisions and you're all set to roll into the new season, you can just check all and proceed. I'm just going to check my one U16 boys house league right now so that I'm not trying to apply the same season that's already there to the other ones. When this is your first season with Goalline, go ahead and just click Create Seasons. There's no teams in this division yet. There are no rosters to worry about. There's nothing that we can do with the optional settings here for a brand new division. So I'm just going to click to create the season. But there are some optional settings that are important to think about when this is not your first season with Goalline. If you've had a season before, then you want to consider how do you want things to work when you click to create a new season. Youth organizations and adult organizations tend to want to make a slightly different choice here. And depending on how you work as a league, if you are running house leagues that are fairly consistent from year to year and you don't use team registration to get teams to register, select their division, and pay a fee to you, then you may want the default behavior for the teams to just be the same as what the system wants to do, which is going to be keeping the teams exactly where they are, but all of the rosters get released, so there's no players or coaches listed on those rosters anymore. And that makes sense because you're going to have, team red, team blue, team orange in your U6 house league, but the roster for U6 house league is going to be different next year than it was this year, because the kids that were U6 this year are going to be U7 or U8 next year. Some of them are going to, change programs and things like that. So typically, the default behavior, teams stay where they are, rosters get released. That's going to work for most organizations. If you're a league, though, that requires teams to register with you each year or each season that you run, you may want to remove the previous active seasons teams from the system. And in fact, I do recommend that when you use team registration on a season to season basis. This is important because you don't want duplicate teams in your league menu, and you don't want teams to run into a team name issue. If the blue team is already in the U16 house league, if they go and try to register as blue team next year, it's going to say there's already a team in the system with that name. So removing the previous active seasons teams from the system helps to make sure that there's not going to be duplicate teams and you're not going to be struggling to see which team is the active team that has the roster. Excuse me. So this is one that you'll want to select if you use team registration, or even if you just want to always start fresh every year. Maybe you don't use team registration, but you add in the teams fresh every year. You add in the teams manually and import rosters, or whatever method you choose to use there. So that's one that's a very important setting to keep in mind if you're a tournament running divisions or if you're a league doing team registration. Adult organizations do tend to want to keep their rosters the same from season to season. Again, this is really going to apply if you don't do team registration. The same teams, give or take, are going to be registering, playing the same with the same roster, give or take, in the new season as they did last year, because it's a little easier for them to just manage one or two roster changes than it is to have to add their entire roster in again in whatever method it is that you offer them to do that, whether it's team registration or you ask them for a spreadsheet or ask them to go add their players manually. So keeping the previous active teams rosters for the new season just makes it so that those teams stay the same and the rosters stay intact. This is typically, as I said earlier, great for adult organizations, not so much for youth, because with youth, there's usually a lot of change based on age and based on tryouts where maybe, a player might have a different skill level this year than they did last year. That's the goal, right? Developing and whatnot, so that maybe they were house league this year, but they're going to play on that A team next year or the double A team. So these are optional settings to always keep in mind, and whatever makes sense to you is how you're going to want to proceed with that. Keep in mind that when I say, check all when it's applicable, you might want, these two to keep their rosters. So maybe I'll manage my season for just those two, and then I'll just repeat the process and I'll pick everybody else and leave those two, they've just got their new season. So I can do different default behaviors or different options when it comes to managing my season. If I just don't check them all, if I just do, these two behave the same way, these two behave differently. So you can do that in iterations, if that makes sense. But once you have all your seasons set up in here, again, the naming convention being that it should reference the calendar year and possibly reference the actual season when it's appropriate, which is typically something that only happens if you run your programming more than once a year. If you have kind of two fully distinct seasons, indoor, outdoor, spring, summer, winter, fall, those kind of things. I guess the other thing that I didn't say that I always say in all my tutorials is don't include the word season. We don't need any extra words in here at all. We just need the numbers and maybe the word indoor or maybe the word fall or something like that. We don't need the word season. You don't need regular season. You don't need any of other words in here. And we're going to look at the next part, which is where we're going to add more words. So we'll go right back out to our schedules homepage and we'll click on manage schedules. Managing schedules, this is going to have a really big impact in how you can manage your division going forward. You'll see again some teaser text where we're giving you the suggestion of regular season. Almost every single team in league anywhere is going to need a schedule that is called regular season. You may also want a schedule that's an exhibition schedule. You may also want one for tournaments so that tournament games can be added and not included in the standings when you're reporting regular season games. Regular season schedules, preseason, regular season, tiering rounds. If you're doing a tournament round robin, these are all examples of the kind of regular season type of schedule that is for standings. The schedule is going to have games on it that could be between any of the teams that we add to that division, and they're going to start accumulating standings either overall or by conference. The playoff and bracket style schedule, this is an important type of schedule if you are doing a playoff or a final or a championship, any kind of tournament play that is not round robin. This is where you're able to set up playoff bracket trees and have playoff series where you can base things off of a regular season schedule or a round robin schedule based on placement, first place versus eighth place, second place versus seventh place, and so on until you end up with a winner at the end of that bracket tree. You generally are going to create your regular season first as a standing style schedule, and then you would come back in and create a playoff bracket style schedule. And there's some settings that you'll want to apply to feed it from the schedule that you want it fed from based on the standings that it's going to be based off of. Here, because We've already done the managed seasons, so we know that everyone has our 2021-22 season. Notice the word season is already here, and it was not part of our season name. So this is kind of that example where we can see how the system's going to start to accumulate these things, and we don't want duplication of words. You wouldn't want to, if you put 2021-22 season, then we would have it say season here. And so that's one of the reasons to avoid using that. So we're just going to check all. Keep in mind, if you have drastically different schedule details that we're going to go through in a moment here, you may do this in iterations as well. And again, I always use kind of the adult versus, U6 age groups as the extreme examples here, because you may have drastically different durations of games. You may have different schedule details with respect to individual statistics versus just game scores. And so there may be different point values and things like that. So you may want to do this in iterations as well, just so that you can get the closest to the best kind of blanket schedule that you're going to be able to get for all of the different divisions that you run. If they're all basically the same, you can get started by just adding the same blanket schedule to everybody, and then make individual adjustments as needed. So maybe I go into my Georgian Bay League and add that one special difference about their point values or something like that. So we'll scroll down and we'll look at some of these options. The most important ones are going to be that it's active and published. It does not have to be published in order for you to continue managing things. It just won't be visible on the public side of the website until you say that, yes, it is published. And the same thing goes for the standings. You don't have to publish the standings right away. And if you don't, then people cannot see the standings until you come back in here and edit this to say yes to publish and yes to publish the standings. The active schedule, at least one active schedule has to, or one schedule has to be set as active. With the regular season schedule, it's generally the one that we recommend that you make active right away. That just makes it active right now, ready to start managing, and you're ready to start adding teams, and rosters can be managed and all of that. Active season, active schedule, very important for the Goalline system, because without them being active, we consider that they're not going to be used, and you will have difficulty doing things like assigning players and coaches to the rosters of any of the teams that don't have an active season or an active schedule. Your choices with tracking and publishing individual player statistics, this is one where we often do see some differences based on the age and the skill of the division. So if you're tracking individual player statistics, you do have to say yes to this question. This is the only way for you to be able to report individual stats, things like who scored and who got penalties or who got cards, not just how many goals were there, or what was the final score of a game, and were there any suspensions. Publishing individual player stats does not have to be yes. You can track individual statistics without choosing to publish them, in which case those game summaries with all those details are not available publicly. It would just be information that you're giving to the back end of the system, and things like accumulated penalty or yellow and red card reports or pitch count reports would all be available in the back end when you're signed in as an admin, but not available to view publicly. Tracking, generally speaking, tracking and publishing are usually going to both be yes at the same time, but just keep in mind that you do have choices there. When it comes to stats, you do have choices with how you want things to look when it comes to goalie statistics or rookie statistics. And then further, you'll have some choices when it comes to how you treat standings when it comes to conferences, but we're going to talk about conferences in a few moments. The tiebreaker to be used is going to be the Goalline default tiebreaker unless you tell the system otherwise. So the Goalline default will be what you'll see. I've created another tiebreaker here that is, it's set to be the new default tiebreaker in this organization. And this is a custom tiebreaker that uses different tiebreaking rules than the Goalline default. And it also allows me to configure the standings, the columns that are going to appear in my standings. We will look in more detail at the custom tiebreaker tool so that you can see kind of what choices do you have available and what's important to know about that. We'll scroll down here. The points awarded, this is fairly straightforward, but I do like to point out a couple of things here. If you don't do overtime as an organization, you'll want to take away the point values for overtime. If you go straight to shootout, you can leave your shootout in the point values here. If I was to leave overtime win values, it's going to assume that we're going to do overtime. And we want to make sure if we do overtime, we tell the system how many periods of it do we do, and then how long is that period of overtime. But it's important to tell the system that you are going to do it. And if you do have a zero, let's say in the shootout win and loss, for example, if this is zero, you won't be able to report a game and indicate who the winner of a shootout was if it did in fact get all the way to a shootout. So it is really important for you to have these win and loss values in the points awarded if the schedule is going to eventually at any point use overtime or shootouts. So that's just an important note in there. When it comes to the value will be added to the appropriate column in standings, but we'll take a look at our standings, our tiebreaker and our custom standings options. So when it comes to overtime wins, you don't necessarily have to call those out specially, but there might be a reason to do overtime loss. If you get 1 point if you lost in overtime. You might want that column to show separately from just the regular loss column because there is a point associated. And that's typically the advice that I give is if there's a point value associated with it, you should show it in the standings so that people don't just look and say, well, they only won 2 games, but what? So why do they have 5 points in the standings if a win is only worth 2 points? Well, you could look and say, okay, they lost in overtime, so there's where that 1 point came from. Really important for folks on the public side to be able to discern where those points came from. So we will look at that in more detail. I just wanted to point out here what the points awarded was going to mean to you. You want to make sure that you have those set appropriately. If yours is 3 for a win, you can definitely go in and just make those adjustments, and whatever adjustments you make to the points awarded for your regulation, overtime, and shootouts, that's going to apply to this schedule for all of the divisions that you happen to be adding it for. There are some extra advanced scheduling tools that we have enabled here. So there are points per period wins here, and there are some fair play options. The points per period, this is something that it's not a super common thing, but if it does apply to you, we do have this feature to enable for any Goalline organization. So if you do have a special kind of method of doing points per period, we can certainly do that. We also have some options when it comes to custom points per game. So if that sounds like it is going to apply to you, let us know and we can enable that feature for you. There are also some organizations who do a different number of minutes per period across their games. For example, I've seen examples where an organization will have 2 periods that are 15 minutes, and then the third period is actually only 5 minutes. We do have custom period length settings that can be applied. So if that's something that sounds like you might use it, even if you only use it for one of your divisions, we can enable that feature. The default is they're all the same until you tell it otherwise. So if you do 3 20-minute periods for almost everybody, but you have this one division that does 2 20s and a 10 or 2 10s and a 5. You can certainly set that up to be appropriate for whatever your scenario is. And there may be some different sports that use that more than others. I just want to point out that that is something that's available. The fair play points and mercy rules, these are some things that are often, I find that there are almost always rules related to mercy and fair play, and also with bonus points and point values in standings when it comes to fair play, as reported by either maybe the referee or the umpire, or coaches determine who gets the fair play point or how many points the other team might get. Lots of different scenarios. been a referee for an awfully long time, and I've seen a lot of different point systems like that. So the fair play bonus points, what you'll find is that you can have this be on either off altogether, which is kind of the default, or it can be on and actually affects your standings, or it's on and it's just display. So it will show in the standings, but it doesn't affect the points in standings. The fair play bonus point value, you can set this to be a 0.5 or a 1, or you can have it be a scale 0 to 10. 0 to 10 is typically used when it's a display only. And this is really just a factor for folks to see and just generally get an idea of, how fair does this team typically play? You have an idea of what to expect when you're seeing a team that has a really high fair play display value. Using the 0.5 and the 1 as an option, these are often combined with actually having the impact on standings. And really what you're going to see is at the reporting stage of the game, you're going to be asked who gets the fair play point. And either, team 1 gets the point. So they'll receive 3 points for the win, but they'll receive 4 points because they actually got the fair play point as well. So it increases the amount of points they have in the standings, which could affect their placement in the standings. So that's an important one to know. Again, the default is that it will be off. So it's not going to automatically start impacting your organization at all. But if this is something that sounds like you want to do that, you can turn it on a per schedule basis and use it for some of your schedules, but not all. And just kind of use that information however you see fit. The mercy and fair play rule is a lot more common. This is the goal differential. So if I put a 5 in here, what this means is that no team can win by more than 5 goals. If you beat my team 10 to 1, you're really only going to get credit for that game being 6 to 1. All the players who scored the goals will still receive their own individual statistics. So if one player scored all 10 of those goals, they get 10 goals in their statistics when we go and look at their career stats on the public side of the website. But when it comes to the points earned in that game for the purpose of tiebreakers and goal differentials, when it comes to the standings, it's only going to count up until the differential has been reached. And if I say 5, it means that, if I scored 5 and you scored 15, it's like you beat me 10 to 5, not 15 to 5. So you do still get to report the whole game. The system takes care of only using the goal differential for the purpose of goals for and against as part of a tiebreaker when it comes to the standings. That sounded a lot more confusing when I said it than it feels like it should be. So if you do have any questions about that, don't hesitate to let me know. But yeah, generally the mercy rule or fair play rule when it comes to the goal differential, pretty common, especially in a lot of house leagues. So if that is something that you use at some levels, you can put that rule in for some of your schedules, but it doesn't have to be there for all. I already alluded to a little bit of the information down here, the number of periods or halves or innings, whatever the terminology is for the sport that you are, is going to be listed here. So if you're baseball, how many innings? If you're, some divisions do 7 innings and some of them do 9. You can maybe do your schedule a couple of different iterations for how many divisions you have with 7 innings, then another time with all the ones that do 9 innings, and extra innings instead of periods and things like that would be listed here. Because this is hockey, I'll relate this to a regular hockey game. So 3 20-minute periods is kind of your typical for your older age groups, might not be typical for a lot of youth. Maybe they're actually going to be 15 or 12-minute periods for the most part. And if there is overtime, maybe it'll only be a 10 or maybe it will be a 5. So you want to set this to be appropriate for the most part of your games and divisions and schedules. If you do up to 3 overtime periods, you can do that. And it's just going to assume that they're all going to be the same duration. The last part in the duration part that's really important, especially for those using the umpire or referee assigning tools, the advanced ref system with Goalline, is the allotted venue time. So most hockey games, typically they're going to be booking that venue for 60 minutes at a time. If you're a soccer organization, you're probably going to be doing this for I would say at least 90, or often it's 105 minutes that gets booked for soccer games. So just under that 2-hour mark, an hour and 45 minutes or so. If you've got two 45-minute periods with a halftime. So whatever you put in here, this is when the system is going to assume the venue is booked. The venue can't be double booked until 105 minutes has passed from the first game that you booked. So a 6 o'clock game, you can't schedule anything else until 7:45. If you try to schedule something for 7 o'clock, it's going to say, nope, that venue is already booked because there's a game at 6 o'clock that's not over till 7:45. Really important to set this up appropriately for that reason. The other reason, as I mentioned with officials, is officials will become available again at, if this says 60 minutes, they're going to be available again after, an hour past the start time of this game. If this is not accurate and the game actually takes 2 hours, then that official is technically going to be able to be double booked. And so that's a really important thing to avoid. You want to make sure that you put your venue time appropriately. Your start and end date of the schedule is exactly what it sounds like. Again, on or before today, going till the end of the schedule when there will be no more scheduled games. You are always able to come in and edit the end date of your schedule. Keep in mind, you can't set the end date of the schedule past the end date that you selected for the season. And you'll note this handy dandy little make this my default option. So if you've gone through here and you've been really thoughtful and you've made a lot of different changes to these settings, because that's how it's going to apply to you going forward for the most part, you can set the default for yourself so that the next time you click manage schedules, these are the details that you're going to see. So if you made a lot of changes and you have some of these custom things in effect, making this the default makes it so that everything except the scheduled date range is going to be exactly the same every time you click on this feature. So that's really, really handy, in particular if you've made a lot of these kind of changes. I'm not going to create the schedule here because I do already have, I guess I do have to create one. I'll create this crazy schedule because I got some pretty weird details, but that's okay. So I'll create this for my U16 House League because I do need to create a schedule there. So we'll start that, not 2020, 2021. We'll do that today. And we want to go till May 31st. All right. So we created our schedule here. So that's going to make my my new house league nice and active. So now that I've got my my schedule there are some things that I might want to look at right away, and that is, do I need conferences? So I'm going to go and I'm going to just navigate to the new league that I created. So here's my U16 Boys House Division. It's going to pop up right away that I don't have any teams, and that's fine. I'm not ready for teams yet. But if I am, I can click to just go right and add the teams or go to my schedule details. I want to go to my schedule details. So I'm going to click that. So we're going to see a very similar screen. It's just that we're only dealing with these schedule details as it pertains to my U16 Boys House Division. And I can use my custom tiebreaker. I can change the tiebreaker here, and I can also add my conferences. When I add conferences, I come down here to edit conferences, and I want to just name them. We use the terminology conference, but you could call this groups or pools, or they can be named for the different divisions within your league. So Pool A and Pool B are pretty common. Group 1, Group 2, Tier 1, Tier 2. So there's lots of different ways that you might want to label your conferences. I'm going to do North and South this time, which is funny because I don't actually really know the difference between North and South when it comes to where I am in the world, except for that the US is South. I'm good at that one. So here's my North and South division, and now I can click here to go back to my details. I don't have any teams yet, but I have conferences now, just waiting for teams to be added in. And I do need to get my teams into the system in some way or another. Really important that I do that. And I can do that in various ways. The first way I can do that is going to be through team registration. So I'm going to go back out to the master menu. If you're going to use team registration, I am just going to point out a couple of important settings, but we do have full detailed webinars that go into how to create and manage a team registration form. I'm going to edit the existing team form that's here, and I'm just going to point out some of those settings. The first one is when it closes. You want to make sure that your registration is open and closes before you plan on scheduling teams, because you don't want teams registering after you've already started your schedule. The next thing that we'll do is scroll down and look at how you're going to select the divisions. So your league options on the drop down are going to be all of the different divisions that you have available, and you need to have the active season and schedule before you can set them as part of your team registration form. So if I was creating a house league registration form, I can say that these are the 3 divisions that you can pick from in order to register against this registration form. These are the only 3 options that are going to be available. And you can see here, we can say only allow registrations to these leagues. Alternatively, I can say do not allow registration to these leagues, in which case it will allow registration to everything else. The other thing that I always like to point out is that if you do have more than one division that you're asking people to select, you should never pre-select from the drop down. So this should say none. And your option here, this is a text field. What should that label be? So by default, select a league. Maybe division is better for you, so you can change that to say select a division if that's what's a better term for you. Select a category, select a tier, whatever makes sense to your organization and to the folks who are going to be looking at your registration form. So this is how you select that. And I'll just point out that I use the control key to select more than one of these options. So I just press and hold the control key, and I can click on the ones that I want to select. The team information you're going to collect is going to be basic information unless you ask for lots and lots of extra details. And then the other thing that I'll point out in here, because it's going to relate to how quickly they can be ready to use, is whether or not you want to automatically accept teams. So by default, Goalline's team registration expects that the teams will register. They'll pay whatever program fee you've set up, and then you will manually review the teams that have registered, and you will choose who you will accept, and you'll individually manually go and approve and accept the teams. If you accept teams based on the fact that they registered and paid the fee, you can choose to automatically accept them. If you don't want to have to do a manual acceptance process, you can absolutely just automatically accept teams. It says automatically accept teams that pay online. Just keep in mind that if you don't charge a team fee and the fee is $0, then they'll be considered paid. So if your acceptance criteria is you've registered on time, or you registered and you paid the appropriate fee, then auto accept is a great option. If you only have, a couple of dozen teams registering with you, then it's not really much of a burden to go and do the manual team acceptance. It's just something that I like to point out that not a lot of organizations take advantage of. If you do have a maximum number that you can accept, you can set that on your program level. So let's see, U16 house. We'll add that payment type, and we'll go in and look at what we can do in here. So I can set right here the maximum number of teams that we can accept. So we can only take 12 teams in this division. After the 12th team has registered and been accepted, everyone else is going to be asked to get on a wait list if I've enabled wait lists for this, or they'll just see that the program is full and they can't register. Tournaments that have an absolute max capacity, you don't have to necessarily even take a wait list, but this is how you get that in there. Your team's qualifications, it's either going to count the first 12 teams regardless of acceptance status, or it's going to let people continue to register until there are 12 accepted teams. This is also where you go to specify the gender of the participants and the age of the participants that are going to actually be added to the roster. So if there is a gender or age restriction or both, you can apply these here on a per program basis, and players who are added to this team must fall within the gender and the age restriction that you've set on here. You'll notice that you do have options to make exceptions for the birth year range. This is to allow you to review and see who they've put in that's outside of this age range, and whether or not you still want to allow them to participate. So this is how you're going to set those restrictions there. So when it comes to team registration, I do recommend that you go and check out the team registration webinar, because there's lots of ins and outs, and that is kind of a full webinar all by itself. And I will go down a rabbit hole and I'll never get out of it if I don't move on and talk about the other ways to get teams into the system. Because the other ways is going to be to add teams manually. This can be done through an import. If you have them listed in a spreadsheet, you need team name and the league name or division name that you've given them. The other option is going to be to just go to your team menu. I won't click it from the pop-up, just so I can show you how to get to it in another way. You're going to go to the league admin section, which I can scroll down to here, and I'm going to click manage teams. When I click manage teams, I just see this screen here that's asking me how many teams am I adding. So if I have 6 or 8 or 10, I can add them all. I'm just going to add 2, and we'll do a blue and purple. So we'll have a blue team and a purple team in this division to get started. You can, add however many teams you want. You can do this as many times as you need to, but now we have the teams listed here, and now they're ready to start kind of scheduling with. We haven't dived into how you add venues into the system, but venues are pretty straightforward to add. The easy peasy way is the quick add, where you just put in the name and there it is. But there again is some advanced scheduling webinars that will talk about how you can manage venues to handle things like half ice or half field. Having this feature is pretty neat, because it makes sure that, yet again, that conflict checking that we already have, that you're going to be able to really be robust with that conflict checking. So check out managing venues if you don't already have all your venues set up in the system, in particular using those child venues. So now let's go, and we're going to click edit schedule details again. We're going to look at these schedule details, and we're going to see that we now have teams, and now I can place them into conferences. Because I have conferences and teams, I actually have at least one more setting that I can use, and that is when we look up here, whether or not the standings should reflect all the games or only the games between teams who are in the same conference. Excuse me, I sneezed there. I'm not sure if I muted myself in time. I do apologize. So standings only reflect games between teams in the same conference, means that if two teams are not in the same conference, but they've played each other, those points don't count in their standings within their conference. They can absolutely count in overall standings if you have separated standings enabled for your organization. So that's a really important setting to make sure that you have correct. If you do allow teams to play cross-conference games and the points count in their regular standings, then you want to obviously say that no, they don't only count when it's in the same conference. They count all the time. So setting the conference here is going to be important for making sure that they show up appropriately on the schedule within their conference. It also adds layers to the abilities that you have with creating your playoff schedules, because your playoff schedules can be first place overall or first place by conference, and things like that. All the different placement options that you get can be by conference. So after you've added these, the conferences here, I guess I don't have enough teams. I need more teams so that we can have more conferences. But with your conferences, as you create the games, it's just a matter of whether or not they should or should not count in different places. So let's do orange and red here, and then we'll add those to our South Conference, and then we'll be able to take a look at the public side in a couple of seconds here. So where did I go? Edit schedule details. And so I'm just going to go and add these new ones into the South Conference and save that. I'm going to add a game so that we can go and obviously at some point we're going to want to report it. Adding games can be done in various ways as well, and we've got lots of tutorials on that. So I'm going to do blue and purple, and they'll play at Cole Harbor Place. They can play today. That works. So we'll create that game. And then we can do orange and red. They will play at Scotia 2, same day, same time. Oops, there we go. All right, so now that I have my games added, I've got 2 games added in here. We can see they're already here on our scrolling game center, and they're already on our upcoming games over here. I can go and I can drill down to them. So on this site here, I've got some different ways that I can get to the different options in there. Let's see here. I want to go. Let's do divisions. So clicking on divisions, clicking on my boys' house, and this is going to show me the standings. And because I added conferences, it is showing me the standings by conference. Blue and purple here, red and orange here. No one has any points here yet. And we can see that the columns in my standings are going to show us the games played, wins, loss, ties, overtime loss, the points, goals for and goals against. These are pretty typical columns to show in your in your standings, because generally these are generally going to be the values that are going to be applicable to your tiebreakers. There are some additional things that may factor into your tiebreaker, like penalty minutes or earliest goals and things like that, if you are tracking individual stats. But generally, these are the standings columns that have the most major impact on standings. So we're going to hop back into the back end here, and then we'll go and I want to look at the tiebreaker tool and then show you how you can make adjustments to that. And I always look for tiebreakers by searching for it. So I just found it in my schedule section here, and here's how I can create a tiebreaker. So here's the tiebreaker that I created. We called it default, and you can see here that there's various steps available. So I've got up to 5 steps here, and it starts with like the first layer of tie of being a tie is points. So I often get asked, how come there's no points option in the steps for the tiebreaker? Because that's the only way they can become tied. So it's not a layer that you have to choose from. So we've got our different options here, and there are lots of options to choose from. I'll just open this up and show you how many different options there are. So there's little things like least penalty minutes, earliest goal, least amount of losses, like save or win percentages. And then there's such a thing as a coin flip. And I'll just point out that the coin flip is the Goalline system doing a coin flip for you behind the scenes with an algorithm. This is not expecting you to stand there and flip a coin where someone guesses it for you to indicate that there was a winner of the coin flip. So if you do come down to a coin flip, the Goalline algorithm does the coin flip for you. And so it's important to know that in advance so that you're not actually doing the coin flip and then having the Goalline system provide maybe a different result that you can't necessarily make adjustments to. So once you have your layers in here, you can move them around. If you had them in the wrong order, you can certainly do that if necessary, but make sure that you have them in whatever order you want them to be, and you can make as many different tiebreakers as you need. So we've only got the one over here, but I can make a different tiebreaker for all of my different age groups if the rules happen to be different. Hopefully they're not, because that would be a nightmare as an organization to have to deal with that many different competition rules. But with the tiebreaker that you create, you have your columns in the standings that you can choose from. There are lots of different columns in the standings that you can choose. So differentials and the last 10 games or a streak, win percentages, things like that. And your different sports that you have are going to provide you with some slightly different options when it comes to what can you select. So you may not have quite as many as what we see here, but the general idea is check it if you want to display it, and then drag and drop it to drop it in the order where you want it to be. The highlighted one is the one that is going to literally be highlighted. So points is what's highlighted here, which is why it's in yellow. We can see points is the one that is highlighted here. I can have any column that I want be the highlighted column. It's important to know that that does not change the method in which it's going to determine who's in first place. It's still always going to be based on points. This is where, as I was saying earlier, if you don't put a point, if you don't give points at all for overtime loss, you don't have to put that column in your standings. Even and a great example is the fact that overtime wins are not separate in the standings, because a win is a win. They're all 2 points or they're all 3 points. It doesn't matter whether you won in overtime or a shootout. You don't get more points for winning. You just get maybe a point for losing in one of those situations. So having overtime loss and maybe shootout loss in your standings might make sense, because there's a point possibly associated with losing in overtime or in a shootout. Whereas if you don't have those columns showing at all in your standings, then it's just going to continue accumulating in the losses column. So I could choose not to display overtime loss or shootout loss, and all of the losses, regardless of their type, will be filed in the one column for losses. So it will break them apart if you show more than one. It'll just accumulate them in the same column if you only show the one. Again, back to my advice from earlier, if you have points associated with them, I do recommend you show them in the standings, because the average person is going to come to the site and not understand how 2 wins and a loss results in 5 points. They're not going to understand how that loss might have been an overtime loss unless you show that column separately, or unless they go the extra mile and do the footwork to look through the game results to note that it was done with an overtime loss. So the columns in your standings, this can be done even if you don't need to change the tiebreakers. You could use the tiebreaker tool to affect the columns in your standings. Once you've made your adjustments to your tiebreaker, then you go through and you add it to your schedule. If you know right away that your schedule is going to need that custom tiebreaker, you're probably best to prepare it ahead of time so that you can have it here and have it be the default, so that when you go and create your new schedules, it's always just going to use your custom tiebreaker that you've already created. So that's the custom tiebreaker and the standings options. The other things that I wanted to talk about, I want to talk really quickly, and I realize that we just hit our time here, but I am going to talk really quickly about suspensions and about how you actually report games. So we're going to talk about suspensions, and that's going to be done for the most part from the master menu. League admin tools do have a manage suspension feature, but this is typically something that is going to be found at the master menu in the people section, managing suspensions. If you are a soccer organization, there is an automatic suspension tool that can automatically set a player to be suspended if they are given a red card or if they've accumulated a certain amount of yellow cards. And you're in control of those settings. That's going to be found in site configuration. Anything beyond the default suspension that's given at a red card or accumulated yellow card is going to be managed the same way we're looking at here, which is to add it either manually or edit the suspension manually. So to create a suspension, you're going to select the division that the suspension is part of, and then you're going to select a team, and you can select from a game information. Now, I probably don't have a lot of game information in here, so let's see if I can do this. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of information on here. Let's see if my Halifax Boys U18 AAA probably has. There we go. There we go. Lots of game stuff here. So I can pick the game here, and then I select the player. So this is going to be the roster for the team. So I select who is receiving the suspension. Notice how there's 2 asterisks here. That's because coaches can be suspended as well. You need to suspend somebody if you're on this screen. And so you could select a coach. I could be suspended, or you can select a player. So one or the other of these drop downs is required. The date that they are suspended is very important. It may be yesterday. So that's really important to keep in mind, because the number of games will start to calculate based on this date. If they were suspended in a game last night and they have a game today, it's very important that their suspension is dated yesterday, so that the Goalline system knows today that they are suspended. And if they are suspended for one game, then tonight's game gets reported. They are no longer suspended after tonight's game. Very important to keep that in mind, because you want the system to automatically not just show that they're suspended, but you want it to count down. Let's say they're suspended for 3 games. That game, so last night they were suspended, but their suspension counts today, tomorrow, and the game they have on the weekend. And so it's not going to be until next week that enough games have passed that they're going to be not suspended anymore. And the Goalline system will take care of the calculations. You do have to put in a reason and a rule. These should relate to your sports rules. So in soccer, it would be whatever the law happens to be. Excuse me. And your organization may have some conventions for how they want this information put in here. You may determine what that convention is going to be, but the reason and the rule reference should be, Law 12, red card. Is why they're suspended. But why were they given a red card? So they were given a red card for violent conduct. And I'm using this example because this is an example where every time you're given a red card, or in hockey, every time you're given a match suspension, you're suspended for a game for the most part, right? But you may be suspended for more than just that one default game, depending on what you did. So violent conduct probably comes with more than a 1-game suspension. So you might be putting in here that they're going to be suspended for 3 games. You can always come back in here and adjust the suspension and indicate that they're going to be suspended for 10 games. And it's still going to be counting from this day. But note that you can also choose to be determined or indefinite. So it may make sense, especially in the case of a violent conduct type of red card situation for soccer, you may want to choose indefinite until there's been hearings and discipline committees and all of that stuff to determine when are they going to be allowed to come back. So you can choose a number of games, or you can choose to be determined or indefinite, which the player will continue to appear suspended until this is edited to be removed back to being 0 for a number of games. So once you've submitted your suspension, we'll suspend for 1. So we'll suspend this player for 1. And then we'll note that there are some search criteria down here, and this is how I can edit. I can even delete suspensions. So deleting a suspension, I generally don't recommend deleting the suspensions. I find that it's nice to have them in the system for posterity, but there are the odd times where maybe it was just full on, maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the referee did a bad decision. That happens once or twice. So you could delete it, but it is a good idea to just edit it and maybe remove it this way, especially if it was a legitimate scenario that resulted in that suspension in the first place. So we have a suspension going on here that is going to stay in the system until the Bedford Bears play another game after September 6th, and that game gets reported. And then the following game, Pierre is not going to appear suspended. So with suspensions, if you don't see suspension options, you're going to go to your website section and you're going to find site configuration. In site configuration, you'll find that there is just a quick enable suspensions option over here in the stats section. I'm pointing at it here, but for your screen, it may be in a different location. So enable suspensions is what you're looking for here, and you just want to make sure that that is set to yes. Until that's set to yes, you can't do anything related to suspensions. This is also, if you are a soccer organization, where you're going to see the suspension, automatically suspending options for red cards and yellow card accumulation. I don't think I have it on this particular it's not on that particular demo site. I'm sorry about that. But with the yellow and red card accumulation automatic suspension, the great part about it is automatic, and there is by default an email notification that is going to go out to the person who's been suspended We don't yet have a warning email that goes out, but it is important to note that all of our divisions do have accumulated penalty and yellow and red card report options. I'm just going to locate the setting in here so that soccer organizations know where to go and look for that. So in site configuration, you should see these options. Let's see. Okay, so we have a, let's see here. Where did it go? Apologies. I know it's going to be found in your site configuration tools. I think I may have, I don't have any soccer organizations on the demo sites that I'm using. I'm so sorry. But that is where you're going to find it. So site configuration is where you're going to enable your suspension tools. And if you are a soccer organization, you should see automatically suspend after red cards and yellow cards. I'm now going to hop right in and we're just going to report a game. And I swear I'm just about done here. So we're going to go and look at our U16 boys house division, and we're going to go to the statistics section. So managing the statistics, once you've got the setup done of your divisions, your schedule details, and all of that is kind of set up correctly with your tiebreakers and your columns, games get in the system, you're really ready to just start reporting games and let the Goalline platform kind of do the rest, because it's going to do the sport math for you. It's going to take care of your standings for you. It's going to feed your playoff schedules for you and all of that stuff. You can see here there are some stats reports. Because this is hockey, we have our accumulated penalty minute reports. So you can always kind of keep a review of these. I'm going to go into my regular season schedule to report one of the games that we created for today. And I'm going to just click to report. Of course, I didn't add a, I'm going to go to a different one here. So you need to have your rosters in the schedule in order for you to report game scores with individual statistics. So I'm just going to see if I have any games on this one. Because with reporting game scores, it is important that your rosters are in there and that they're accurate and active. If you don't have active rosters, then you don't have individuals to go and provide the goals for. You don't have anybody to give credit for a goal to. So there's no players for you to select. So we'll do Blizzard and Lightning. There we go. Look at that. It's found my conflict because I created a game earlier at that same venue. So I am going to do Gillette Stadium. All right. So now we'll see, we've got a game to report here. And I should definitely have some rosters. We go. So I have some suspended players over here. Anybody who is suspended should be listed as ineligible. Obviously, I haven't gone through and updated jersey numbers, but if these jersey numbers are part of the roster, they'll populate in here, but you definitely have the chance to put those in. So once you submit your lineups, that's when you're going to start reporting the statistics. So this one is hockey, but the screen itself, oh goodness gracious, the screen itself does look very similar to other sports. I think, no matter what sport you are, it's going to look very similar. If you're lacrosse or hockey, soccer, lots of different sports are going to look this way. There are some sports where it's really just going to list the rosters with some columns for the statistics. With hockey and soccer and other sports where you're doing individual stats, you can choose to do it by one player. This player is going to score a goal. It's the first period. There's 10 minutes on the clock, 10 minutes and 20 seconds on the clock. We can get really specific here. And it's assisted by McDonald. So you can click to do that and enter a goal, and that's going to update that it's going to make it 1-0, and it's going to start accumulating the goal and penalty summary down here. So whether you're recording goals one at a time or penalty information one at a time, if you're doing this live from the stands of the game, this is a great way to go about it. The rule references should be very specific to your sport when it comes to what you're seeing in these lists. So whether it's soccer or hockey or lacrosse, you should see the appropriate options in here. If you're doing this after the game, you don't have to do it this one at a time kind of method. You can enter all goals and enter, say, 3 goals and put in the details of all 3 goals. You do have one of the settings on your schedule details was whether or not you're going to collect the actual time of the goals and things that happen. In soccer, it's often a choice. That's not necessarily something that every division tracks. But if you are tracking it, this is how you're going to put that information. So when, what team, who, what kind, and then once you're done, you submit those goals. And when you're all set, you get to the end of the game and you indicate that there's no time left on the clock. Here's where, if you didn't have a value for your shootout win, you wouldn't have an option here to say who won in a shootout. And notice how I don't have an overtime option here. So I would need to tell the system that there was possibly a period of overtime before we ended up ending this game. So this is an important kind of screen to make sure that you're ending the game properly. If you end the game, so the end of the third, 0 minutes, there was no shootout winner. It was just a 1-0 game. And then I can choose, because I'm at the league level here, I can choose to lock this game so that no one can make any changes to it. If I do that, only someone who also has the permission to manage locked games is going to be able to come in and deal with that game. So the coach of the Blizzard team can't come in and make changes to the way that this game was reported. If they have a problem with the game report, they would reach out to their league coordinator and say, hey, I don't think this is right. My game sheet says this, and the appropriate corrections can be made by the person who has permission to do so. So you can submit that the game is over, and that's going to show that game summary and everything on the public side, and folks are going to be able to go in and see the stats of that game, and they're going to see their own personal statistics get updated along with their, their team standings and everything on the public side of your website. So with that, we've looked at a lot of different things today, and I do apologize that I went over in time. I was hoping that I wasn't going to do that. And I'm just going to recap a couple of the webinars that I do strongly recommend you check out if you're not familiar with those tools already, and that is team registration. Team registration tools are super convenient, especially for tournaments and for leagues where you have fees that you need teams to pay on an annual basis. Team registration also provides you with some abilities to collect and track roster information. It also helps you with the ability to automatically add a team contact as an administrator with certain permissions that they can then use to do things like report games or adjust jersey numbers and that type of thing in the system. So team registration can be a super convenient tool for you. If you're not using team registration, no worries there. Individual registration also has its own dedicated webinar. Those two things can be combined. Team registration can ask for team information. Individual players can be sent to an individual form where they can select their team as they register. The benefit there is the team contact is agreeing to team waivers, and the individuals are agreeing to their own personal waivers and paying for any other individual team or personal fees that they may have to pay to be part of your league. So that's a really good one to look into. There's also an advanced scheduling tools webinar that I put on a few months ago that goes into a little bit of different kind of details when it comes to some of the other settings and how to get games into the system and in some different ways. Adding games is really kind of, it's really fairly simple. If you add games one at a time, that's what we did here today. But we do offer the ability to upload schedules or tie in. If you are a club and your league uses Goalline, you can tie in your team to your league. We have so many networks across Canada that are using that kind of functionality. And the best part about it is there's absolutely no syncing needed to happen between those two platforms. So if Trevor's league is using Goalline and my club is using Goalline, I can go and tie my blue team in to Trevor's blue team here. That means I don't have to maintain the schedule for my blue team at all anymore. My Goalline website is going to show the blue team schedule because Trevor's demo site is going to show it. And when they report games, my site is going to be updated with the statistics related to the games that are reported here. So the team tie-in feature, when your club or association, whatever the label is in your sport and in your area, when they're using Goalline, those types of tie-ins, those are super convenient tie-ins that lets the league see your roster and that lets your club participants see the schedules and all the information from your website, as opposed to having them have to go and check kind of two different websites. I'm going to check my club website anyway. I don't want to also have to check my league's website because the information I want is all related to the schedule and my team. So those are some things to definitely check out. Our YouTube channel for Goalline has all kinds of our previously recorded webinars. And obviously, whenever you have any questions, reach out to our support team, either email, live chat, or give us a call, and we'll help you out. So apologies again for going over on the time here, but I think definitely worth it for those that have had the patience. Appreciate all of you who stuck around here. Thanks so much, and have a great day.